I can't imagine there's many folks listening to this show who've never felt the heaviness of our climate future, of our climate present. I mean, I certainly have. And I'm a privileged white man with a podcast, right? Who didn't grow up inundated with air pollution or threatened by the rising seas, by the rains, by the heat. I don't farm for my own food like billions of other people, but the comfort gained by these privileges, the inverse of all of this means my footprint, if you will, is enormously more than the people who are already suffering the most, who will suffer the most. I really wasn't aware of that for a very long time. But as Dr. Catherine Hayhoe says, we have to talk about it. But not just what's happening and what to do about it, but how we're dealing with it. How angry we are, how shamed we are, how scared we are. My guest in episode 136 is Dr. Britt Wray. Britt is the author of the fantastic new book, Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Crisis. Britt has a Ph.D. in science communication from the University of Copenhagen, and she's the author of The Rise of Necrofauna, The Science, Ethics, and Risks of De-Extinction. Britt Wray, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Quinn. Good to be here.
All right. Well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes here. Britt, I like to start with one question we ask everybody. It is, I think, reveals something deeper about all of us, also sets a tone for being a little ridiculous. Don't be afraid to laugh at it. Most people do. So instead of saying, Britt, what's your entire life story? I like to ask, why are you vital to the survival of the species?
Oh, my goodness. Grandiose. We'll get
That's
going
right.
here. Well, these days, my work is focused on very existential questions. It's about how people are going to be able to protect their sanity in a world on fire, which is increasingly traumatic to vulnerable populations in the line of climate disasters and those who are simply aware of what's going on and the lack of moral clarity in our leadership to address the problem of the climate and wider ecological crisis, which creates chronic eco-anxiety and a loss of sense of security in the world as we face this daunting future with many bullets in the gun, climate just being one of them. So I'd say something vital about my work is that I'm looking at those scary developments and trying to get ahead of the ball to work with others in creating mental health protection strategies that are able to be widely shared and freely accessible.
That's amazing and is going to be increasingly needed. So thank you for pacifying me and answering that one. It's always funny. You never know. We get people who cackle at it and then reveal something so illuminating, or they're just like, I'm not. And that's also awesome.
Sure.
You never know. You never know.
Yeah.
So let me, apropos of your amazing book and how thoughtful it is and how well researched and cited and empathetic it is, and what you just described as to how you feel you fit into all of this madness. Let me ask you this question. How are you?
I am feeling really grateful these days, like in the last couple days, just because I'm enjoying my 6-month-old baby so much and laughing with him all the time and having these moments where my partner and I look across the room and are just like, oh, like, look at this creature. And this is a whole new thing in my life because it's the first time being a mom and exploring these little bursts of what that means for your day-to-day existence and then reflecting on it in a deep way has been, how I've been reflecting on where I'm at over the weekend. And now it's Monday. But of course, it's been extremely sad and just enraging to watch what's going on in Ukraine in recent weeks and listen to reportage from the ground of, innocent people's lives that are being ripped apart in this humanitarian disaster that is sickeningly driven by fossil-fueled capitalism and patriarchal menace. And it's been tough. So there's a tension there. And I think that's the tension that's been around for a long time now. Pandemic, climate research, war, yeah, there's a lot.
That cycle. Let me ask you this. This gratitude, obviously, maybe not obviously. I mean, there's so much that can happen after a baby. Obviously, you can all sorts of depressions and stress, and we're tired and all these things. Is your gratitude something you have made? There's so much out there these days, and I've subscribed to a lot of it about really making an effort to practice gratitude in the sense of like stopping, trying to recognize it, trying to, sit in it for a moment. Is that something you've always been good at? Is that something you've tried to work on? Or has it just been like, holy shit, this baby's incredible?
I'm really not good at that. I want to be better at it. I know that having a gratitude journal is a healthy practice, or ensuring that every night when you go to sleep, you reflect on 3 good things that happened in the day. And when you wake up in the morning, you do it again. Those people are amazing. Mm-hmm. I am too forgetful. It's not even that I don't want to do it. I just forget that that's even an option to me when I'm living through my life and zooming to sleep and zooming awake, etc.
Yeah.
So no, with our little dude, it's more about being struck by his awesomeness and then being very present. Someone described parenting as an aggressive form of meditation, because every moment is forcing you to be present. Yeah. Very present moment, connected to the baby and its needs. So I think it's just that impulse has an effect on me, where he does something and then I'm grabbed in the moment and realizing that the feeling is gratitude. Yeah.
Sure. Wait till he starts walking, and then it's an entirely different form of being present,
right?
Because they try to kill themselves every 30 seconds. It's an adventure.
Oh my gosh, how do people do
I
it?
love that. I think you just lock them in, like you build the baby gate things, and then or the bouncers, and you just leave. That's what our third kid.
Right.
I mean, it's like total standard third kid. We put him in the little. I'm gonna get arrested. We put him in the little bouncer, and we got to go. I had 3 kids under 3 at one point. Like I got to go get 2 other kids out of cribs, and we come back and we're like, oh my god, you've been in your bouncer for like an hour. He's like, I get it. You got a lot going on. Like it's it's too much. I'm happy to just play with these things.
Oh, nice, cool kid. For not crying.
He's a pretty good sport. We're lucky. But yeah, really into fairness, which is interesting. But I think it's just because he's like, how come they get to do this and I don't?
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, different conversation. That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm the same way. You read about the people with the morning routines and like wake up and take a 1-hour walk with just a little journal and a pen and this. And I'm like, that's so great for you. I'm sure it's like a blissful existence and truly like good on you. And I hope it bears fruit and it betters society and yourself and you die happy. And I'm just like, listen guys, this is the Raisin Bran we have. I'm sorry it's not the one you wanted, but that's what we fucking got. So eat up. Yeah, that's my blissful walk. Hey, so speaking of young people, I guess slightly more advanced young people, as I've been thinking about this conversation, again, reading your amazing book, I try to get, as I always kind of say to folks, sort of a 201 or a 301 and whatever a conversation's about before we do it, so it can be more of a conversation than just an interview. And I'm lucky to have a family just chock full of professional mental health folks in a variety of capacities. So always on the mind and being challenged on these things. But I was in an Uber the other day, and there's a driver. He was a young to early middle-aged black man, probably around my age. Thoughtful, concerned human. It was about 40 minutes. We had time to get into things. And one of the things we were talking about was I'm in Virginia, and we're sort of back and forth in the process of legalizing marijuana. So it started with decriminalization, and now it's legalization, and they're working towards retail. And one of these ideas he brought up was he was really concerned about young people and how it might be abused. And we tried to together contextualize it around the limited research we have around side effects and health outcomes, but also in a broader sense around alcohol and obviously what opioids have done to so many folks as they have sought to cope with everything or pain, physical or mental. And we got into the mental health side, and he brought it back to the youth. And again, I don't think he was much older than I was, or at least he looked a lot better than I do. But one of his points was he really didn't understand how and genuinely, not in a way where he was criticizing, but how are the young people so anxious and so stressed, and why? And again, he clearly wasn't seeking to diminish us. He really seemed like he wanted to understand it. So again, we contextualized and we talked about all the trauma and the plight of what previous generations have gone through, in the early 60s with Cuba or 9/11 or the financial issues. And, you said in the book, the world's been ending for a long time, right? In a lot of different ways for a lot of different folks. Often, if not mostly disproportionately, more so by the less wealthy. But we've also survived. So considering, again, that this is your field of focus and young people, I wonder how often you run into folks older than we are who truly don't understand. Maybe they've been through other things themselves, or maybe they don't grasp truly the ramifications of what's happening and what's going to happen, but who do want to understand this, again, overwhelming anxiety that we're seeing in so many young people. Like, is this something that's prevalent or no? And thank you for listening to my tale.
Thank you for the setup. It's
Sure.
something that I've encountered a lot. I was on a call with some mental health professionals last week, and one asked, okay, what's going on? We've had the Holocaust. We've had nuclear crises. We've had genocides all over in all shapes and sizes. What's up with this generation? Are they coddled? Are they soft? Right? I mean, why do we need to introduce trauma-informed ways of doing climate education in the classroom? I don't get it. And it's a sentiment that I've heard from many people who are of older generations. And I think there's a few things that we need to break down.
Please.
Firstly, stepping aside from the climate crisis. So the statistics on youth mental health have been going off the charts in a bad way for the better part of the last decade in terms of anxiety, depression, suicidality. And a lot of that research has hooked in with ideas around the I generation, right? Technology, social media, these kinds of propensities that capitalism has spread throughout our culture in such a way that these devices and the tech on them crawl down our brain, hijack the brainstem, become addictive and really are deleterious to young people's mental health as it relates to them feeling lonely and isolated and not good enough and constantly comparing to others, and in this endless hall of mirrors, this simulacrum in the digital space of socializing and they're not getting together in real life as much. Kids aren't having as much sex. They aren't partying as much. They're on their phones, etc. All these think pieces that we've seen about it. And there are, in the United States, there's a huge mental health crisis where a lot of parents of teenagers who are having mental health crises can't get beds for their kids when they're in a moment of high danger. And it's saturated. The system is saturated. There's not enough mental health care professionals to be able to treat these kids, and there are desperate parents saying, what can we do? It's, of course, been in a pandemic, which has been its own mental health pandemic for young people who've borne the brunt of a lot of those negative impacts. And, I was brought in for a conference on parenting teens at the last minute because it was trying to address this, that, we have young people and Gen Z not doing well, and we don't know how to help them. So we're going to get all these great interdisciplinary voices together about healing and trauma and resilience and mental health supports for these young folks. And at the end of their program, they realized, we haven't even incorporated anything about the climate crisis yet. This is an afterthought.
Right.
Meaning there's a lot going on already, right?
Sure.
Regardless of the climate, which is difficult for younger people today to navigate, as well as for their families to figure out the best ways to support them. But then you add in the climate crisis, which to many young people does not feel like it's some kind of potential apocalypse in the future. It's something already here, unfolding. The science, the best science in the world, is telling us, as Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, paraphrased and summarized it as, a code red for humanity, right? And with all of that knowledge, the best measurements and models for decades in terms of the delay we've had on this with respect to action and leadership, they are still seeing the people who are put in positions of power to protect them fail to take up their responsibility to do so on a daily basis, right? They read the dire reports and news, and then they read an article that Biden is going to ship a bunch of natural gas to Europe, and so on and so forth, or how many new drilling permissions were given under his presidency, given that it's so-called climate presidency. I mean, what's going on, you know? Sure. Those kinds of feelings tip into a space of moral injury, feeling institutionally betrayed. So it's much worse. It's not just that young people are feeling bad because the environment isn't doing well and they can see the effects of that, whether it's rolling in as a wildfire, flood, hurricane, drought, sea level rise, sea ice loss in their communities, or heat waves. And of course, importantly, the way that this is intimately tied up with systemic racism and those who are dealing with the most air pollution from burning of fossil fuels in their neighborhoods, and dealing with being in the least resilient neighborhoods for being able to repair after some of these impacts, often poor communities of color. And by no accident, it's by design, of course, because of history of racist policies that have redlined certain communities into certain places. But furthermore, it's so much worse because it feels like the adults have left the building. It feels like those people who have the power in society to act on this are not taking the opportunities to do so and failing them further. And so it's this, cannibalism of the future feeling that they're living with.
That's good.
And that's a heck of a lot to bear as a young person who's got their eyes open to the climate crisis, and just furthermore living in a society where people are happy to hop in their big trucks and go to Costco and buy all the shit wrapped in plastic and bring it home and never pay any mind about where this is going, because it's an invisibility aspect of the throwaway culture, right? Someone else will deal with it, and yet they can feel that it's piling up. So all those are the kinds of sentiments that young people tell me when I talk to them about it. And it's a lot on top of other issues that are already, of course, causing them stress.
Right. You got to love when you see the Twitter poll. And it's like, first of all, any sentence that starts with that should just be shot down immediately. But people are like, why are young people mad that they can't buy a house? And you're like, that's like, yes, but also it's like number 47 on the fucking list of issues, Yeah. And it's so many things. And, I was really struck and again, identified as someone with young, very privileged white kids, but also, try to mentor where I can. And, but also someone, again, with kids. And I'm sure as you're discovering more and more with your partner and your child, so much of successful, of trust and succeeding and flourishing through anything comes down to both communication, but also expectations, right? And shit happens, of course. But it seems like as humans, so much of our dread comes down to often uncertainty, even the smallest thing, right? And that sort of anxiety can affect different people in so many different ways. Yeah. But that's why clear expectations are so helpful, right? Whether you've got a 6 months old or you've got a huge job, you're running thousands of people, or you're a policymaker, but ruined expectations. No one has more expectations than people in the West, right? Because we have so far to fall, in the sense that we are wealthier than anyone has ever been. So folks in the West, especially white people, just have this, like you said, this lifestyle where we go and buy all this stuff and we power these things with these fossil fuels, and we've never truly even calculated the true cost of these things. It's interesting, but also not surprising that so many of the folks in that who are able to go to therapy are people who can afford to be there, because therapy is expensive.
Yeah.
So many folks in the U.S. don't have health care, much less one that covers it because they're hourly workers. And again, those are the people who were sold sort of this bill of goods or participated in this bill of goods, and so their expectations have the farthest to fall. But you use this word betrayed, and that is the other extension of it is it goes from being misled by the climate administration, right, to being betrayed. And this idea, like you said, that the world is more fragile than we thought, but that there are also – you would think upon discovering that we would do something about it, and that's where they feel like they've been betrayed the most is you said you were going to do – you said you recognized the problem and you said you were going to do something about it, and you're doing the opposite. And so I wonder how much you really encounter like actual anger. Like how much of this grief comes from people who feel angry and betrayed at where we are? Because we're past like, is it real?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Way past it. And the anger is a predominant emotion out there with lots of generations, not just young people. And it's rooted in a healthy sense of injustice. It means that one's conscience is intact, right? And that they know what it feels like to be morally transgressed. And their radar for being wronged is turned on. And so it's a healthy emotion to be acting from. It can be very motivating. There have been studies of eco-emotions and, arguments from that data to show that it's a more productive emotion to be angry rather than depressed, for example, or anxious about the environmental crisis. But of course, it's not like we just have one emotion at a time. There's many in which we can find ourselves. But I think that that's a perfectly fruitful and good place to be working from when you're pissed off about what's happening, not only because, there's such, and we're speaking in a highly American context through some of the examples we've given already, but of course this is global with lots of various forms of, bodies who are meant to act on this not doing so. And that's why you've got young people rising up and suing their governments, right, under the framework that it violates their human rights because they're not, governments are not protecting the future habitability of the planet. I mean, it doesn't get more existential than that. It's very core what these arguments are. And it's perfectly logical. At the same time, the anxiety from the uncertainty is very understandable too. Our brains hate it's very taxing to have to try and sort through and coexist and just be calm while sitting with mass uncertainty about how much temperatures are going to rise, how governments are going to act, how humanity will band together and unite under this sense of shared humanity and partnership protection for each other or not, and go the opposite and split and fragment and become more dominating in localized spaces as people, clamor and clobber each other over dwindling resources, which obviously feels very likely as a direction. So all of that, for various evolutionary reasons, is really hard for our brains to deal with, and we need to practice dealing with uncertainty and tolerating it for longer periods of time, which is not intuitive, and we need to come together with others in order to figure out how we can shore ourselves up to do that kind of work as the world spins in this more chaotic way as we've been experiencing. So, yeah. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but we started on anger.
No, I think we did. And it made me think about you wrote a little bit in the book, but you also your newsletter is also fantastic. Thank you for that. It's so helpful personally, but also to the work I'm trying to do here. And you wrote recently, and apologies, like time is a flat circle. I'm a goldfish, whatever metaphor you need. I can't keep track of things at this point. But recently you wrote about this increasing effort and need to develop a real taxonomy around the feelings we're feeling and what's being done and happening to us. And you just mentioned, we started with anger, but you said, obviously we are able, and it's important to recognize that we can feel many different things at once. How important is this effort to develop a real taxonomy so that we can hopefully help people more and help ourselves more? But I'm also curious, and this is a slight pivot, but I try to think about seeing as people that look like me have generally for a few thousand years been the people in charge, and that hasn't worked out so great. who gets to decide that taxonomy? Because, when we talk to folks about AI ethics, there's this idea of the alignment problem, which is it's not the data and the algorithms, it's the people designing them, the people in the room, which tend to be the same people over and over, right? So I'm curious about how important is this taxonomy and who really gets to have input and decide on how we move these things forward?
So that was actually a project organized by Panu Pikula, who's a Finnish eco-anxiety researcher. And what he did was conduct a systematic review of the published literature that's been put out there, academically speaking, to date on environmental emotions, eco-emotions, what are called psychoterratic emotions, so emotions relating to felt and perceived states of the earth that are just out there in the literature. And he said, we need some kind of organizing principle around what people are learning from doing studies with communities about how this is affecting them emotionally, the environmental crisis. And then he organized the findings into these categorized learnings, which I shared on my newsletter. So really, it's not a call to action to create a new taxonomy as much as it is showing what one researcher found when taking a non-biased approach to sorting through what scholars have figured out about how these emotions are showing up in people's lives and what impact they have. And then he put it into one article so at least we can get a lay of the land by reading through and seeing what people have found. So in that sense, of course, there will be biases about who's doing that research, right?
Of course.
And who has the environmental education to even care about this, to then go conduct a study, to, be in that form of profession, working in some research institution and asking people about their anxiety, grief, or jealousy or rage or joy and connection, all these different emotions he found and was writing about. But that doesn't mean that the taxonomy is closed. And of course, there will be new ways of studying how these emotions are showing up in people's lives. And it's helpful because it creates some awareness and space for reflection in many of our societies. We are not very emotionally intelligent, right? We prize rationality. We prize progress. We prize feeling great, happiness, getting out there and doing your thing in the world and go, go, go. And there's been a huge amount of toxic positivity that has trickled down into all of our lives because of that lack of depth and curiosity for looking at the full spectrum of human emotions, which include the challenging ones, because, as Buddhists say, joy and suffering are both equal, indivisible aspects of life, of being here. And we like to tamper down the suffering part as much as possible and just focus on the emotions we can not feel shame around, not judge ourselves for, and not feel judged by others for having. But this leaves us really underserved, especially when it comes to increasingly challenging times, when these emotions are natural responses to caring about the world, feeling an attachment to things that really matter to us. And then our anxiety points out that something's in danger, for example, or, the depression can set in about something, and the grief about something that's being lost. All of this is a totally normal and natural reaction to have, but we have very few tools and little socially supported equipment, meaning social norms, for processing this together. So a taxonomy is helpful because it gives permission, it validates, it legitimizes, it gives examples of other people who are reckoning with these emotions and finding ways to not only feel them and sit in them, and that's important. Even just that first step is really hard for people. We can do a lot to suppress them. But also importantly, learn how to reframe the emotions and harness them for things that are meaningful or purposeful or helpful or, good. I'm trying to not use terms like good and bad here because I want to get away from this positive negative framing. But, you can harness climate anxiety, for example, for motivating really fantastic climate justice oriented work.
Sure. Yeah, I loved that part of the book where you got into the, and again, it could be different for different people on any given minute, hour, day. And again, I'm incredibly privileged, but it felt that way. There's days where I'm just like, my wife is, literally at times found me hiding under a blanket at home, and she's like, "Oh, that's not great," And I'm as privileged as it could possibly get. This hasn't affected me in any way, health or family or financial wise in any capacity, and yet we feel these things. But then there are times where you just, you use this grief or this anger or whatever the description might be that falls within this taxonomy, and it seems like it makes so much sense, right? Because again, we can ask all these questions and we can interrogate who gets to do what, but it seems like you said, at least intentionally non-biased or less biased attempt at establishing a baseline shared, as much as it can be shared, language, and almost walking away at that point, to then find out how much universality there is within this, by region, by people, by experience, whatever it is. Pick your climate threat. That seems helpful. It seems like it's something at the very least we can build on, because without that, it's hard. And again, it, like you said, it comes down to expectations. I thought about that. There's a moment in the book, you shared the quote from the young person who. It was the section on having kids, which you were so thoughtful and brave to share your experience and your process in that. And I know so many folks go through that and young people. But there's a quote from the young person who basically was just like, look, I don't regret being born. Like, but did my parents fucking think about it twice? Like that this is what they're bringing me into. And that is just profound, because there's this metaphor that's often thrown around of, I'm not sure if you follow baseball or any sports at all, and they can be overused and oversimplify things, but this idea of coming up to bat with 2 strikes on you, right?
Right.
And it's like, there's one thing about your expectations, about being misled or having those ruined. It's another thing to come out and be like, oh, we're just fucked? Like that's the thing? Like that's what I've got to work with? That is, boy, I mean, what that must do has got to just be incredibly traumatic and hopefully at times empowering, but I don't think we can assume that it acts that way for everyone.
No, exactly. Yeah, it was a powerful quote. I think she said verbatim, it's not that I wish that I were dead. It's that, did they have any fucking clue about what was going on when they decided to have me, because I'm so stressed out about my future I can hardly take it, is the general idea there. And it's a common sentiment, and it really, this idea of having 2 strikes against you is profound about being born at this moment in time, because we are going through this phase shift in generations, right? Where there had been generations improving upon what their parents had given them time and time again. And the sense of an expansive future and more productivity and more wealth and more health and longer lifetimes and, all the stuff that Steven Pinker likes to talk about in terms of less war and more prosperity. And rather quickly, we have a complete breakdown in those trends. And it's not like the kids who are now reckoning with that are being raised in social norms that are focused on supportively processing that twist and ushering through a new way of looking at the world and identifying questions of what is enough and what am I here for? What's my purpose? How am I going to show up at this moment in time? People are generally not reflecting on those questions, but moving through with the former presumptions about all these things we're supposed to expect, and it's not happening. And, no one in my generation can get a pension or afford to buy a home and, so on and so forth, let alone these other bigger issues. And so in that sense, it leaves young people feeling awash without anyone kind of legitimizing these fears and stresses on them except for their own peers, which is not helpful. And it leaves even more of a burden on them to figure this out when they've already inherited the climate crisis and the duty to clean it up. And they're often made aware of this before they have an opportunity to figure out important aspects of their identity, grow up and have fun and experiment and, find their unique path in the world. It's landing on their shoulders at really young ages now. And those who are still alive and the ones in power and holding office have been able to enjoy these expansive, prosperous ways of going about their own generational existence. And so there's just a disconnect there, and it's rather quick and it's jarring, but it does leave also, especially those with privilege and protection, who have been raised by those kinds of families, saying, that's not what we were promised. We were told that this is supposed to be, all the things we could possibly, especially millennials with our whole me generation, you can be anything you want to be kind of parenting format. It's a huge disconnect when then this sense of whether it's a foreboding feeling about societal collapse due to climate catastrophe or other issues sets in, breaks through defenses. It's no longer just an intellectual problem of, this environmental crisis, we really ought to throw all of our muscle at it and get technologically innovative here and rework our policies. It's then an overwhelming stress that means that those psychological defenses are no longer helpful to you, and you experience what the sociologist Anthony Giddens calls ontological insecurity, when you no longer feel safe in the world or secure. And that creates all kinds of huge behavioral responses, a real fragmentation. It can feel like an internal shattering. It can be so intense that people really cannot bear it. And I'm not saying this is all young people. I'm saying that some young people who are dealing with the eco-distress experience it in this way. And it tends to be harder for those who have privilege and protection, because this is what teaches them that the world is far more fragile than they thought it was.
Sure. And
dangerous than they thought it was. So that's an interesting thing that people are processing, but often on their own, and feeling really alienated and isolated in that, and they need support. They need to find others and talk it through and not feel so abject in their loneliness about that. And then, of course, we talk about communities who are not so privileged and protected and who have long known that the world is a dangerous place.
Right. They're promised not much.
Yeah. And the two strikes against them feeling has been there a long time. And now there's this foreboding climate crisis awareness on top of it. Talk about injustices upon injustices upon injustices, and a real need to develop an ethics of care that is pointed at supporting those communities, And so that's why also this kind of eco-distress can be such a transformative bridge, as a powerful form of solidarity creation, because those with more privilege and protection who are waking up feeling like the world is ending, so to speak, quote unquote. I don't actually mean that. We can talk about what we mean by saying the world has ended many times before.
Sure.
Can do that kind of inner reflection and think, oh man, if I'm feeling this shaken up by the lack of action towards this problem and the increasing obviousness of its detrimental effects in communities all around me, how are these other people feeling, right?
Sure.
And which can help people gain some perspective and not just be so navel-gazy about it.
And that does seem to be part of, again, especially folks like myself have to endeavor to do, which is deal with my own shit, not to undervalue it, hiding under a blanket, but at the same time, really work to listen, to understand and empathize, and then as much as possible be an ally to, again, peoples and groups who like you said, it's been two strikes forever. And often it's because of systems designed that way. And we keep doing that. You mentioned this sort of almost innate default action of finding folks to relate with and talk with, and how that can be hard. And I think about, I've been very lucky over the past few years getting into all of this. to found a group of folks who, frankly, have been doing it much, much longer than I have, and gone through the ups and downs, who I can call, frankly, or text and say, Jesus, this is dark, and they already know that. They're probably thinking that too. They've got someone they can call and text about it. Usually, it doesn't necessarily mean they're okay. However we want to phrase that, but I have realized that I have to be very careful and strategic about who I really talk to about the true, like the what could happen things, the what's already baked in what could happen things, like the mathematical real world stuff, but also how I'm feeling about it. Because you can really ruin someone's day who isn't aware or isn't prepared.
Oh, yeah.
Or isn't down with this. You have to be careful with your relationships. I mean, you shared that story of someone saying, hey, listen, your shit's gotten really dark. You need to be aware of that. And I've gotten that talk 100%. It's made me go like, should I be doing this? Because I'm not sure if I'm capable of handling it in a way that I can balance my life and end the work. But at the same time, it seems like I had this wonderful call with the folks at Sesame Street, and they were asking, hey, listen, we want to, I mean, literally, I was like, I'll drop everything. I don't fucking care. Like, I'll literally, I was like, I owe you guys everything. But it was this question of sort of like, how do we do this in a way that, because they shifted their formatting, I don't remember how long ago, from, I think it was like 4 to 5 year olds to 3 to 4 year olds. And that's a big change for the intended audience. And it's like, how do you talk about 3 to 4 year olds about climate change? It's like, it's really hard. But, one of the things I've thought about a lot, and again, how I talk to my kids, again, very privileged and can handle this and have access to the outside and water and air they can breathe. But it's about relationships, really. It's about our relationships with nature, of which we're inextricably part of, relationships with each other. Relationships. So I have worked hard to make the show. My guests are 60% identify as women and almost 50% are people of color, because the least I can do is at least listen to them and then try to be allies and build relationships. But at the same time, we have to be so careful that, again, the people we talk to, we're not putting a burden on them, or even worse, that we're being extractive. And I wonder if you've gained any insight into a way to be methodical and empathetic and thoughtful about doing that, as I think there's probably a lot of folks out there, again, who are listening to this, who are working hard either on climate or something else or COVID or public health, who are like, I still don't have those people that I can talk to, and I want to make sure I'm not making it worse.
Yes. Yeah, these are all really key questions. Oh, yeah. I've been in many uncomfortable situations where I'm being too frank and honest about my own fears and the rattling number of scientific papers in my brain whose findings are terrifying that I need to talk about. And it's not the right audience. And it's typically because they haven't had their awakening and they're, let's be honest, keeping their head in the sand to protect their own psychic comfort, which is very understandable and very normal, and lots of people do it. And I do it consciously from time to time to give myself a break, of course. However, there is a whole world out there of people who are gathering specifically to provide a container, a safe space for people to come together and talk about these issues and how they're affecting them, so that they can get that relief and support and new energizing ideas for how to respond to it emotionally and rationally. And some groups that I can mention, for example, are Climate Awakening. Climate Awakening is led by Margaret Klein Solomon, who's a psychologist and activist, and she has these virtual drop-in sessions where you can show up and talk about anything under the sun as it relates to the fact that sun is making you feel warmer. But really, it's a place for direct conversation with, just a one-off kind of session. And there's also climate cafes which are decentralized gatherings run all over the world. You can Google Climate Cafe in your area and see if one's happening. But the Climate Psychology Alliances of the UK and North America are hosting a bunch of them. And those can be a productive space for knowing, okay, here it's okay to share whatever's on your mind. There's nothing that you're going to be judged for. Everything's going to be validated and mirrored, and other people are going to share their feelings too, and that's going to be strengthening. But then what I think is even more powerful than a single drop-in session, depending on where you're at, are these programs that actually move you through weeks and weeks of meeting together. So something like the Good Grief Network, it's modeled actually on Alcoholics Anonymous. They turned it into a 10-step program, and it's for exploring all of these intense, challenging emotions that come with the uncertainty that the climate and eco crisis brings into our lives. And by the end of the program, each week there's a step, and they really go there, talking about mortality and all sorts of things. And at the end, you are led through a process of reinvesting the emotional energy that you've lost from being freaked out or angry or, depressed, whatever it might be about the crisis, into actions that are meaningful for you in authentic ways. No prescription about how to take action, but, who are you and what are you good at and what brings you joy and what feels like it needs doing and how do you tap in, that kind of a thing, which is really regenerating. There's also the Work That Reconnects, which is a really powerful program that people can find, again, in their different locales by looking to see if they are run, or there's just virtual formats of the Work That Reconnects facilitators. It's all about, going through grief about injustices in the world as it relates to the eco crisis, and then coming out the other side, seeing the world with new eyes. There's All We Can Save circles off that best-selling feminist anthology, All We Can Save, and those are, propping up all over. So there is basically a cottage industry of support groups for talking about this stuff because the need is very great and people are saying, I need someone to talk to. And then there's also climate-aware therapy, but that gets us into one-on-one meetings, and, not everyone has the means to be able to pay for a therapist, but if you do, they're an incredibly powerful support to, again, dwell in the emotions with someone who gets it and who can help you cope. So there's a Climate Aware Therapy directory that people can look up through the Climate Psychology Alliance and Climate Psychiatry Alliance. And by the way, just listen to those words. Those are real professional alliances now. Climate Psychology, Climate Psychiatry, where mental health professionals are reorganizing their memberships to focusing on the trauma that comes from the climate crisis as a number one threat. So it's a ripe time for finding support, but really all you need are the right friends who get it and who aren't going to say, don't be so dire, you're fine, or look outside, the sky isn't falling, or you're just being dramatic. You need to have someone who truly will allow you to dwell in that space and will stand in the fire with you. And it's amazing how relieving that is, just to find the right audience. So you need to be aware about who you're talking to and how you might be existentially stressing them in ways that they're not ready for.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And again, everyone is very different, and all of that is justified, and you can change. But I know it also again helped me to have someone, my wife, say like, you gotta, if you're gonna do this, you got to find a way to not, like, we're not talking shove things down, but like, you got to be able to come home to 3 young kids and like handle your shit. And around me too, because a relationship would be nice. Not that these things aren't hard, don't diminish it, but there's got to be things. And it's wonderful and hard to hear that we've come so far, that we've got this cottage industry. I wish it didn't have to exist.
Exactly.
But I'm glad we're getting it. Go ahead.
When in your life, as that shows up, is it related to climate distress specifically that you're talking about when your wife says you got to handle your shit before you come home to our 3 kids? Or is it because your work is looking at so many intersecting and synchronous crises? It's not just climate, right?
I don't recommend it.
That's a challenge, of course, to be thinking about this stuff 8 hours a day. It
is. I will find, I'm everyone, at the beginning of this, and often with new folks in our community, they go, oh, do you have a scientific background or engineering this? I'm like, no, like liberal arts major. That's what I got. So I can take a step back and ask annoying questions and hopefully try to, pull the dots together. Like I said to you, we've had 136 conversations that are published. There's probably 10 times more offline. I really try to level up. And so bringing those pieces together has been helpful. Whether it's just journals or it's conversations or whatever it might be. One thing I've found for myself, and again, this is kind of how we've built this thing, and I'm very aware of the criticisms of this on the whole, and if it's not executed well, and certainly we don't do it perfectly, which is this sense of we also want to we're going to talk about climate or COVID or kids' cancer. But I want to provide you with a really specific way you can do something about it at the end of it, because it can often be helpful. It is not a solve for everyone or often anyone, but for a lot of folks, it's something. And we try to frame it as this might just help you feel better today, or this will probably measurably drive some sort of systemic change, whether it's some voting or legislation or policy or whatever it might be, right? But I find it helps folks who just come to us and say, what can I do? So that has been helpful for me. It certainly doesn't solve everything. I think taking on all of these things is a lot. But again, if I had this conversation with a friend who's a journalist at Bloomberg Green, Akshat Rathi, who's great. He's been on the show a couple times. He chases in particular down things like the house of cards that is like carbon offsets, right? And we had this brief chat about looking at how old we both were and all these net zero plans and the ticking clock and when we need to decarbonize. And you look at it and go like, oh, that's literally our lifetimes. And you have to ask this question. I try to be, with 3 kids, manageable at how I use my time. And, that's that idea of how we measure our time is how we spend our days, right? And if that's my lifetime and I want to back up and go, how do I want to spend my days? I want to be a dad who's home for dinner every night and put my kids to bed. I feel very lucky to be able to do that. But what am I doing in between? Because at some point they're going to be like, hey, Dad, things have gone south. Like, what did you do? And I'll say, I had a podcast. But more so, it's a question of, what are you for? And what can you do? And what can you provide value, if any? And, if that's how I spend my time is talking about and trying to investigate and help people rethink and take some action on, if they want to, these big issues that can make a cleaner, more equitable world for more folks, then that's great. It's just that sometimes I'm going to have a hard time with it. But finding people I can talk to, having a million therapists, a variety, a potpourri of them in my family, having friends, professional networks, being able to take time off, knowing that I have air to breathe and things like that is helpful. But I want to get into the reverse real quick in just a second. Of you were saying there's all these these amazing cottage industries of folks who are trained and up to date on what's happening so that they can be supportive, especially psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers. I want to get into how they can actually get into those type of networks, those folks, and how they can improve themselves. But first, just a quick, more philosophical thing, because I loved this idea you had in the book, and it rings into one of my favorite guests, Bina Venkatarman, who is she's an author of a book called The Optimist Telescope.
Oh, I know her stuff. Yeah, she's great.
Fucking great. She was the editor for the Boston Globe opinion section until recently. She's this quote in her book that just totally reframed so much of my work and how I spend my time, which is this idea of how can I be a better ancestor, right?
Yes.
And you have this idea in the book of essentially like, yes, you should help yourself and take care of yourself and those around you, and we can deal with these problems. But also, how do we see ourselves as links in this chain, right? From the beginning to the end, not to minimize ourselves, but as stewards of the timeline and time and this planet. And we can't give up. We have to have resilience. And I love both of those because I think all the time, like, again, how can we be better ancestors? And I'm wondering, again, sort of pragmatically, constructively, like, what have you come upon that helps people see themselves in that way a little more, as opposed to like, everything is fucked right now.
Right. The one thing that I think is just so core to why indigenous worldviews are typically very healthy is that many indigenous communities think in terms of 7 generations out, right? So acting with the knowledge that you are one aspect of a vessel that extends through 7 generations of human beings who are in kinship with the rivers and lakes and birds and ants and everything, right? It is an interconnectedness that is never outside of one's consciousness. And of course, that is not the way in which many non-Indigenous folks have been raised to think about themselves, but it's possible to practice modes of becoming aware of that truth, right? That there are so many generations beyond you, and that there was a moment at which this culture took form that required a severance from acting with that connection in mind. It wasn't that we were always this way. There was, and I try to trace this a little bit in the book too, through thinkers who have tried to address how Western culture became so disenchanted. And of course, this links in with industrialization and domination and extraction. And but when you no longer see yourself as connected to the natural world, you are living a profoundly unenchanted life, as the mythologist and psychologist Sharon Blackie talks about. When you are no longer able to marvel at the beautiful biodesign of a squirrel, then you are no longer able to live your full human potential as an enchanted person here. And so those kinds of thought patterns, I think, are really key for not taking for granted this moment as the way it had to be, but it's really the product of specific histories, specific people at certain times making certain decisions because it benefited them, while stomping on other aspects of existence that maybe we want to go back and think carefully about. And again, this is in the book. I'm not doing a good job now of tracing this for you, but how can we think about what we might like to restore from the past? Things that have been lost and things that used to be ours. And similarly, when we're looking in the past, we can also think about the future and understand that one of the main traumas, this social contract that's breaking down between adults and young people right now, is an act of failed ancestorship. When young people are feeling like, the moral injury is on high because people put in power to protect them are not doing so by not acting in responsible ways towards the climate crisis. This is a glimpse into, of course, an extension of that trend line that we can think about into future generations that would be horrible to uphold. And so it takes conscious awareness. It takes thinking about the ways in which we are showing up or abandoning the moment. But in terms of really key practices for being an ancestor, I think it's driven by moral clarity. I think it's driven by one's internal ethical compass. It's if you're awake to the moment and feeling distressed, you understand that this isn't just about right now. This is about what it's turning into. So strengthening yourself in ways internally and externally to focus on that and not turn away when it's so much easier to look away is a really key aspect of being a good ancestor right now. But that means, and I think this is in line with what you're trying to do with your podcast, by pushing people towards action, which is so important. We need to be externally strengthened and able to throw all of our talents and, schedules at these different intersecting crises to improve the outcome for our descendants, whether they're biologically ours or not. But also we need to understand that activism isn't just external. Activism is also internal, as the fabulous climate aware therapist Caroline Hickman talks about. And we haven't really regarded our internal worlds as a place for activism, but it's a whole space in which we must draw our attention to find ways of being not only able to soothe ourselves and work with our nervous systems through various forms of mindfulness, meditation, self-care, whatever it might be, ways of living within our window of tolerance for uncertainty and regulating our nervous systems. But being able to do that, as you said, in relationship with others, co-regulating our nervous systems with our kids when things are getting tougher. That's a difficult task, and it's a lifelong project, and we need to do that so that we're not just reacting and lashing out by external circumstances that are challenging to us and then affecting the nervous systems of our kids and not leaving them in a good, resilient place, for example.
Sure.
All of that is key, but then there's just the emotional quotient of being able to accept and allow your feelings to be there so that they move through you and you aren't exerting all this unconscious energy and suppressing them. And then able to connect that internal world of activism with your external world and use your emotions as navigational tools to guide you towards where you can be most effective in the external action, and really honing in on things that are most important to you that you're worried about is a powerful way to cope at this time. And, I think we weren't recording yet, but you said that, there's lots of people who are feeling like, oh, geez, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, but I've been spending the last 10, 15 years helping social media companies make better ads or whatever, and they're feeling like it's not making them feel alive at this time. And paying attention to those emotions is key, right?
Yeah.
Being able to get in touch with them and allow them to steer you to things that get you to tap into your, as Sarah Wilson, the writer and podcaster, says, your one wild and precious life, right? To really burst through these norms that have put you in a lane that you're dissatisfied with and find the new path forward that is going to make you feel most vital, alive, awake, connected, able to practice loving kindness in the way that you move through your workday and your relationships. Like, all of that is connected to your internal activism. So I think that those kinds of developments, as we move into more challenging times, people are realizing that stuff's not working, and it's guiding them towards these kinds of internal reckonings, which is fantastic. I think it's very hopeful. There's an amazing paper in The Lancet by some eco-anxiety researchers who say that although uncomfortable, the rise in eco-anxiety and eco-grief may ultimately be a hopeful thing because it's the crucible through which humanity must pass to harness the energy for the life-saving actions that are now required. It's the ultimate sieve or sieve, I never know how to pronounce that word.
Who can know?
Through which we move so that the bullshit gets brushed aside, There's no room for it. It doesn't fit through the holes. And then you come out the other side in this more distilled form with clarity about what you're going to do. And that's all emotionally driven.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. That's extremely powerful. And it does matter. I mean, no one's saying like, go and download Headspace and do it for 10 days and you'll be fine. It's like, that's a tool and it's not for everyone, but it's out there. And these climate networks and variety of ways of pulling people together and helping you explore your inner activism, as you so eloquently put it, are out there. And they're, again, for better or worse, more available and probably more grounded in where we are and how we can help each other and help ourselves than ever before. But that pausing to have a moment of, which is so hard these days when our phones are programmed to take us away, when we're intentionally not supposed to have a moment alone with our thoughts for 1,000 different reasons. That pausing to have any sort of self-awareness of where you are and what you might be feeling and why just makes it can often be, such a powerful, if terrifying at times, heartbreaking first step, but it can really, take you so far. And again, because we're only going to get this way if more and more people are able to do this, it's, the more people that can have that moment, let themselves have that moment, and then start to work on themselves and then start to work externally, the further we're going to get to making this, like you said, something that is livable, if not flourishing, if not better for folks 7 generations later.
And this is, again, where we think about injustice and responsibility and who we are in this ongoing cataclysm and what duties are ours compared to others, because there's also a lot of people out there who can't afford to reflect and take the time and don't have the mobility socially to be able to then rearrange everything and go work on this crisis, for example, if they're just trying to get through 3 part-time jobs and feed their kids and whatever it might be. And so those with the most power and privilege also track with the most emissions, the most using of the resources, and have the most flexibility to reorient and reattach to, as the psychoanalyst Sally Weintraub says, the parts of themselves that care, to like burst this bubble of the culture of uncare that we've been mired in for so long and take responsibility in life. And so I think that those with the ability to do so ought to do so, and it is our responsibility.
Absolutely. It is. Not to say it won't be difficult. Again, like the highest expectations have the farthest to fall. But at the same time, like you said, the greater responsibility, whether it's to the greater crowd that's alive now or 7 generations in the past and future, you asked, effectively, what is it like to sort of examine all of these make or break things all the time? And what it does is it gives me the ability, which is not unique or profound in any way. Obviously, there's people who've been fighting and illuminating and fighting for these things for eons, mostly marginalized people. But to look at something like a coronavirus, which we have a lot of experience with, this one happened to be novel, and the N happened to be every person on planet Earth. But what makes actively this virus so dangerous and so deadly are the underlying societal things that we actively choose not to do every day to support those people who don't have time to switch their jobs because they think climate is cool now, or to take time to reflect because we don't have paid sick leave, because we don't have paid time off, we don't have time to vote, because again, you don't have to do a lot of math to see what air pollution does on the whole, and especially in a couple of years where we have a cardiorespiratory virus or these pre-existing, cardiopulmonary conditions that again, they're a choice that we have made, the folks in power to continue doing, and it makes it so much harder on a day-to-day basis, kind of like the sunny day flooding they talk about in places like Miami, but also when the storms come, when the viruses come, for those people who already have 2 strikes on them and can't do anything about it, that are going to suffer. And so, like you said, that is our responsibility to go, we have to fix these underlying things, as Ed Yong, the writer in The Atlantic, put it. His version of the metaphor was, this virus was a flood that illuminated it found every crack in the sidewalk that was ever there. And ours was, mine was, it's like a pop quiz, and it's like, hey, here's all the choices you've made. Let's see how it goes. And it's not great.
Right.
But there are those of us who are much better positioned, even in our times of suffering or hardship, to actually do something about it once we're able to steel ourselves to do so. And again, I think that's part of the reason why I have tried to orient this towards not just context, but action, not just to help you feel like you're doing something, but so we can fucking do something.
That's amazing. Yes.
I don't know about that, but
I love that.
I love that. Hey, so what are some more systemic things folks can do to improve support and access for more people? Is it supporting those particular organizations you named before? Anything else you want to call out before we get you out of here?
Well, yeah, those organizations are key for helping you on your own internal activism around the climate crisis. But as we're talking about external actions, it's really amazing how many ways people can attach, right? So, of course, there's the big, important, typical ones. You can vote for the climate. You can make that a key issue in which you choose your candidates and vote. You can support any environmental justice group that is working in this space, of which there are tons and tons and tons. So choose your favorite, whether you're looking at youth-driven movements like Youth versus Apocalypse or Sunrise Movement or This is Zero Hour or, Fridays for Future, or you're looking at intergenerational groups, the 350.orgs and others. Actually, Bill McKibben has a really interesting new
the new
project.
one, Third Act. Yeah.
Third Act, yeah, which I
So
love,
cool.
about mobilizing people in the third act of their life to
Awesome.
come alive around this topic.
Yep.
So that's so great. But anyway, Google's going to do a great job there for you, finding the groups that you want, rather than me listing them in my sleep-deprived brain right now. But
I don't want to ask you to name everyone.
No. But I think what's more compelling than just talking about those ways in, which are really important, is doing this Venn diagram exercise that Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who's a co-editor of All We Can Save, that feminist climate anthology, has created, where there's these three circles that come together in a Venn diagram. And one is basically, what am I good at? You know, like, you're a good communicator, and you're good, obviously, at project managing and media and these sorts of things, and maybe writing and maybe research. And I'm guessing all these things probably resonate with you because
Are we talking about me? Oh boy.
Podcast. Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So that would be one way to fill out that circle. And then another would be, what brings you joy?
Yeah.
Maybe you're fascinated by the human condition and human psychology and talking to interesting characters and learning from people who know about niche things and so on and so forth. Whatever makes you get out of bed in the morning, or maybe it's your kids, or maybe it's music, or I don't know, gardening.
Sure.
And then the third circle is, what is the work that needs doing? And here we can tap into the planetary health crisis, which is just teeming with work that needs doing, whether we're talking about, you know, the rates of infectious disease changing in a warming world, or water scarcity, or soil desertification, or the biodiversity crisis, or environmental justice issues and air pollution in low-income communities, and so on and so forth. There's just way more than that too, right? Go to the Planetary Health Alliance, by the way, that website, and you can learn all about different things to work on. And then the sweet spot is where those three circles overlap. And that creates a portal through which you can walk and find an authentic way of reorienting your efforts and time towards the thing that you're good at, that it brings in what you're good at and what you're joyful about, and addresses the work that needs doing. And when you can figure out your own recipe like that for making change, then it's much more likely to stick. Like, I would imagine that you are interested in people, which is why you want to talk to them for a living, and that you know that the work that needs doing involves helping people find their ways to tap in at this time, and being a bridge builder towards people's emerging concern, and, you know, meaningful ways that they can make a difference. And so in that circle comes this idea of a podcast whereby you are probing very key issues to our moment and allowing for resource sharing and advocacy that can help people make these decisions and changes for their own existence, right? And now you have a podcast that is likely to stick because you're the author of it and it feels good. It's not someone telling you be a climate activist that looks like this and that and has a sign at this and that protest that looks, you know, says XYZ things. It's you figuring it out. And so I've done those kinds of diagrams without knowing that I was doing it, which is what caused me to leave my former field of synthetic biology. And just as I was finishing my Ph.D. in a totally different space, and then reorient towards focusing on climate and mental health because of, you know, these key things that were making me get out of bed in the morning and felt like I could bring my skills to, and knew that it was addressing a need that was out there and growing. So I really would encourage people to just look up Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, climate action diagram, look for those three intersecting circles, plug in your own variables, and see if you can find a way of making some shifts that feel right for you. Because there's endless places that need help right now, and therefore there's also endless approaches to which we can come at it from. The climate and eco crisis touches everything. As you said, the pandemic was the pop quiz. All the issues that came up on that test also connect with the planetary health crisis writ large, of which the pandemic is one subset. So, you know, we've got a lot of opportunity. Yeah,
that's what I feel like usually how my Uber rides or sitting next to somebody on a plane or whatever it is, when they say, what can I do? And I say, what can you do? And it's, what do you love? And what can you do? And often I will then tell them, listen, I can't tell you literally what you can do, but if you can answer those two questions, I can tell you 4,000 things we like that check those boxes, because we need kitchen sink. We need the whole shebang. So it's wonderful, whatever brings you joy and that you're able to offer, whether that's volunteering or part-time or donating or full-time or whatever it might be. I can't believe you also fully know synthetic biology. It's just, I barely get through my day.
Science communication focus on synthetic biology. I was not doing the lab work.
You just gave me like a full free therapy session. We don't need to take yourself down a notch here. It's impressive. It's impressive. This has all been so tremendous and wonderful and empathetic and I hope helpful to a lot of folks. And I can't wait for people to get their hands on your book. Truly. I have three little questions I ask everyone. Then we're getting you out of here because TikTok, we got a lot to do. First one, Britt, who is someone in your life that has positively impacted your work in the past 6 months?
Oh, there's so many. Jeez. Okay.
You got to pick one.
I'm going to pick Caroline Hickman.
Okay.
Not only is she the climate aware therapist who I talked about earlier as being fantastic, and therefore every time I meet with her, she has endless nuggets of wisdom that she speaks, but she was the lead author on a study that I co-published with her and a bunch of our other colleagues looking at climate anxiety in 10,000 children and young people's lives around the world, 10 countries spanning low, middle, and high income nations. And our findings were, even for those of us who are mired in this stuff day in, day out, alarming to us as to how severe the disruption of functioning in young people's lives, their climate anxiety is, which has become this really useful paper. I think there were more than 1,000 media articles written about it, went around the world. The UN Secretary General brought it into the General Assembly, and Stephen Colbert did a bit on his show about it, and basically just like upped the ante of the conversation of how real this is.
Sure.
And therefore, I think she's been an incredible boon for the field, and therefore, for my work too, and helping to address the importance of young people's well-being given their climate distress.
Awesome. I love that. What is because it is really hard to deal with all this sometimes, and internal activism often includes self-care. What is your version of turning it all off and taking care of yourself?
Ooh, I've got a few. Certainly conscious short-term suppression, meaning not thinking and working on the crisis all hours of the day, every day, bringing it home with me every night, thinking about it all weekend. Because I've been there too, and I've been doing that. Sure. And it's just a recipe for burnout and misery. And so instead, I now know how to shift gears and allow myself go into play mode and, hang out and be with my best friends and have fun and be a goof and all that stuff, and be able to park it rather than being that anxious kind of activist always talking about it and not seeing my needs met by other people who just didn't want to go there.
Sure.
So I've been able to, so that's been kind of important. And then meditation, yoga, before I had a baby, when I used to have time for such things, I need to get it back in my life. Running, and cooking as a relaxation, reading novels, reading fiction, and interestingly, listening to podcasts or like audiobooks about astrophysics and things that really explore the cosmos and therefore point out how infinitesimally small this moment is in the history of creation, existence, whatever you want to call it. That's very calming, strangely.
I like it.
Yeah, those are some.
Awesome. I love those. Those are awesome. Yeah, I think people just love to hear about those because, frankly, we all can do a better job. And so I think people are always like, oh, that works for her. I'll do taking a walk in the forest or biking or whatever it is.
Right.
Last one, you mentioned reading. What is a book that you have read this year that either opened your mind to something you hadn't considered before, could be astrophysics, or has actually changed your thinking in some way? We've got a bookshop list of all this stuff. And obviously your book is going to go on that list as well.
That's so sweet of you. Thank you for sharing the book.
Oh my God, of course.
I'm loving reading the Greek myths right now. I'm reading an anthology of the Greek myths. And this is not something I've visited since I was a child. And it's very much helping me think about the power of story and narrative and enduring human qualities, and even more so the detrimental aspects of human nature. And thinking about ancestors, as we were talking about, people not actually changing that much throughout time, given these stories, has been, I think, a refreshing way of me thinking about my work going forward, interestingly. But that's what I'm reading right now, so maybe that's a lazy answer just because it's what's at the top of my mind.
No, it's awesome. What is the anthology? Do you recall? Sorry to put you on the spot. People demand specifics.
Here is Gustav Schwab's Greek Myths, and that's
gorgeous.
It's a gorgeous Taschen book, so it's filled with artwork.
Oh my gosh!
All the stories, which is
that's gorgeous.
It's what I do with some of my short-term suppression time from the climate crisis.
Short-term suppression is fantastic and so necessary. Like you said, if you can learn to park it, truly it helps. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Britt. The book, again, we will put the link on Bookshop. It's available everywhere. This episode will come out, this conversation, when your book comes out, which is fantastic. I'm sure nothing impactful will happen in the time between now and then because everything is totally fine out there. Britt, where can the people follow you on the internet besides when they get your book?
Oh, yeah. So I have a free newsletter at jendred.substack.com where I share articles, interviews, Q&As, advice columns with not advice from me, but climate experts out there. And this is focused on the intersection of psychology and the eco crisis. So the tagline is "Staying Sane in the Climate Crisis," and you can sign up there, jendred.substack.com. And furthermore, I'm on Twitter at Britt Wray and Instagram at jen_dread.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for sharing my book and having me on. It was such a nice conversation.
Of course. You are truly doing an enormous service. So thank you for leaving synthetic biology in the backseat. We need you. And thank you. So thank you for your time. And of course. That's it. We'll talk soon once we fix the whole thing. It'll be great.